Hey guys, I'm Mountain Fiber, and in this video I'm going to share with you how I made the Folkwear 210 Armistice Blouse pattern. I love 1910s fashion, especially late 1910s fashion, and I've been looking for an accessible way of adding some pieces into my everyday wardrobe. Armistice blouses were in style between 1915 and the early 1920s, and they're named for the Armistice of 1918, which brought about the end of World War I. They have this interesting long rectangular collar, which is very much in line with the open collars of late 1910s blouses. Upon reading some of the pattern reviews, I noticed that this is more of a historically inspired rather than historically accurate pattern, but I still think it serves as a great introduction. I'm fine with not getting completely authentic construction methods or having the pattern be based on an authentic historical pattern block, so long as I get detailed illustrated instructions which can help me learn how to put a blouse together. Then later I will go ahead and dive into using extant 1910s patterns if I want, or drafting my own, but I wanted to start out with some kind of solid background, so let's get started. I began by cutting out my pattern pieces and ironing my fabric, with a little friend sitting by the step watching me, just waiting to be helpful. Then I traced the pieces onto my fabric and cut them out, all except for the cuffs, since I already knew I was going to be shortening the sleeves to half their length. I'm using this really beautiful Japanese cotton dobby. It's black with these little sort of florals in different colors, and it has a very slight sheen to it. I thought the pattern was kind of nice, not necessarily historically accurate, but they did really like their textured black fabrics. The first step of this pattern tells you to run 2 lines of gathering threads at the shoulders of the front bodice pieces, then gather them down to match the shoulder length of the back pieces, and then sew the bodice together. I sewed the waist ties out of fashion fabric right sides together and turned it out and pressed it. I ran gathering stitches a few inches above the hem of the shirt and sewed the middle of the waist tie to the gathered section, leaving 2 long tails free. Next, I attached the side seams of the blouse using French seams. I sewed up the sides wrong sides together, then trimmed down the seam allowance to about 1/4 of an inch. I turned the blouse inside out, ironed the seam flat, and then sewed along the same seam with right sides together this time, neatly enclosing the raw edges within the seam. Up next was the collar. I sewed the collar and self-fabric facing right sides together, turning neatly at the corners by keeping the needle down when I lifted the presser foot. Then I trimmed the seam allowances, clipping the corners, and sewed the collar in place. I pressed in the edges of the curved facing for the neck, then pinned it along the front opening of the blouse, which was rather difficult. Then I whip-stitched the facing in place. I have sewn in the facing. You can't really see it because it's so black, but sewed it in, and then I whip stitched it down. I may have done this wrong just because like the curve in the facing is so weird and it's like puckered, and fortunately it's not too bad on the right side, but it is not ideal. I really did not love this process, so I might think about a different way of facing the collar and neckline and the front pieces of the bodice for the next version, but for now, this is what I got. After struggling my way through the facing, I set my sewing aside long enough to enjoy some fresh air. Off camera, I measured my arm to figure out how long I wanted the sleeve to be. I was aiming for a mid-length sleeve with a simple turned-up cuff like I'd seen in some extant examples. I cut one sleeve to size, then used it as a guide to cut the next. I sewed up the sides of the sleeves and pinned them into the armhole right sides together, then sewed them in place. I remember deciding to worry about finishing the raw edges later, but I just checked, and I never did. Fortunately, the fabric isn't fraying too badly, so I'm not really concerned. Then I sewed on the cuff, just a band of fabric a few inches wide, and hand-stitched it into a folded-up position. I pressed over the edges of the vestee, then sewed along the fold. The pattern wants you to attach one side to the blouse and leave the other side free for buttons or snaps. But since the blouse is so loose-fitting, I decided to secure both sides of the vestee and pull the blouse on over my head instead. I whip-stitched a few inches of black cotton lace to the top of the vestee. I liked the sort of lozenge-like geometric pattern it had, and thought it paired nicely with the subtle geometric print of my fabric. Then it was time to whip-stitch the vestee in place and hem the blouse by hand. And here is my completed Armistice blouse. I've worn it a number of times already, either with jeans or a high-waisted skirt, and I love the silhouette. It's both modern and also distinctly 1910s. Overall, I'm very glad I chose to use this pattern by Folkwear, and I plan on making several more Armistice blouses from it in the future. See you next time!